students, sometimes I feel like I'm talking too low or talking too loud. So I'm Dr. Tina Lee, Professor of Criminal Justice at UT Martin. This is my 20th year teaching at UT Martin. And I was not supposed to be your speaker today. So Dr. Purtle, do you guys know Dr. Danny Purtle? He was supposed to be your speaker, but he's going through some health issues. So I talked to him on Wednesday, and so he asked me if I could take his place. So excuse me if you see any mistakes in here. I had 2 days to get this together, and I think I got more than enough information for you guys because it's like 49 slides. So if you want to tell me to shut up at some point, you want to ask questions, just let me know. So I will be talking about racial and ethnic disparities in criminal justice. And something came out yesterday. The Department of Justice, there was a lawsuit filed against a town in Mississippi, Lexington, about discrimination and abuse by the police in this small town. And so, and this is going to be true of not just, of course, Mississippi and this small town. So this is what they were doing. So this came out yesterday, the 27th. So the Department of Justice with Lexington Police Department, I highlighted some stuff. So police in a Mississippi city discriminate against Black people, use excessive force, and retaliate against crime, the Justice Department found. Civil rights abuse by law enforcement in one of America's poorest counties. And that racial disparity in policing and harassment in rural town, there's about 1,200 people in this town, and 76% of them Black. And so what they found is that the police use arrests to generate money. They kept people behind bars to try to, because they can pay their fines. They found that officers sexually harassed women in this town and threatened to use force during their arrest. They found that Black people who committed traffic offenses were more likely to be arrested as compared to white citizens that committed traffic offenses. They found that officers repeatedly used force against Black people, but never against white people. And they found also that they had arrested more than 650 people. Remember, that town is 1,200. Yes, so roughly half of the city's population they arrested because of unpaid fines. And they also found that police officers used tasers to punish people, punched and kicked people who were unarmed and handcuffed. One officer told dispatchers he didn't give an explicit about the person's civil rights. And pretty much there was a lawsuit filed against the police department, and they were accused of terrorizing people through false arrests, intimidation, and other abuses. And so this was like I said, a small town in Mississippi, but this is something that occurs throughout the United States in larger areas as well as in small towns. So like I said, I'm going to do racial and ethnic disparities in criminal justice. What I have found through the research is that we do need to do a lot more research in rural communities about these topics. So I found this quote that I thought was very appropriate for this discussion by James Baldwin. If one really wished to know how justice is administered in a county, one does not question the police, the lawyers, the judges, or the protected members of the middle class. One goes to the unprotected, those precisely who need the law's protection the most, and listen to their testimonies. So the good thing about criminal justice is that, I don't know if this is a good thing, but all the other topics that are covered today, the criminal justice system are impacted by it. So when you see discrimination in housing, discrimination in mental health, educational discrimination, employment discrimination, that has a direct link to our criminal justice system. And so when I'm talking about racial and ethnic disparities, I'm talking about the unfair treatment of people based on their race or ethnicity, and it's invasive in all aspects of the United States. And it's interrelated as well. So like I said, crime isn't just its own unique thing. Those people who are more likely to commit crimes also experience a multitude of disparities and injustice in the United States. So like I said, all the racial and ethnic disparities, mostly what the research shows is urban areas. But for the topics that I'm going to discuss today, they also apply to rural areas just like West Tennessee. But like I said, we need to do more research in terms of exactly the impact of racial and ethnic disparities in rural areas. So do minorities commit more crimes? I don't know. But what I do know is that they are represented in the data more. So this is just a breakdown of the population in the United States. So you see how whites make up about 59% of the population. And it is projected to go down, and that racial minorities are expected in about 25 more years to be the majority. And there is a theory that says that as minority populations increase, mechanisms control over them also increases. So the idea is that the criminal justice system and other systems are going to continue on to engage in unjust actions against minorities as their populations increase. We're going to see increases in trying to control who votes and who doesn't. People in jails and prisons. So increase in arrest rates, increase in disparities in how kids are treated in the educational system as a mechanism of control and a mechanism of the majority trying to maintain that control, both political, economic, and other forms. So what does the arrest data say? You can click on the link, but I'll just tell you. So in the United States, African Americans, we saw that this previous slide, they make up about 13% of the population, but they make up about 26.6% of the crime data, arrest statistics. And it's also similar in terms of Tennessee, where African Americans make up about 17.8% of the population, but almost twice as represented by arrest data. And Hispanic or Latino makes up about 19% of the arrest data. In Tennessee, we found that blacks are more likely, they're 2.5 times more likely to be arrested or incarcerated in Tennessee, and about 37% likely to be in our local jails, compared to 17.8% of the population. We know that there's multiple factors that influence the crime rate. From sometimes crime is a choice. But for many individuals, crime isn't a choice. It's related to factors beyond their control, whether it's biological factors or psychological factors. But I'm going to focus more on the sociological factors, economics, family structure, and social environment. Your environments influence crime. When your environment cannot take care of you, crime is going to flourish. And most of these reasons why people committed crimes are rooted in ethnic and racial disparities. Your communities, whether your community has resources, the type of educational experience you have, whether there's job opportunities. We talk about health and mental health opportunities. All of those are rooted in ethnic and racial disparities, and all of them have an impact on crime rates and how people are treated by the criminal justice system. So in criminal justice disparities, we're going to talk about the degree to which minority groups' rates of contact with the justice system is different than the rate of majority or non-Hispanic whites. What are some reasons for race and ethnic disparities in the criminal justice system? Negative stereotypes, inequitable policies and practices, and systemic disadvantages. And I broke those down. Negative stereotypes, implicit and explicit biases by police officers, by district attorneys, by judges, even by people who serve on juries. They have these biases against African American and other minorities that if they commit crimes, it's because of them. Something is wrong with them. They're violent individuals. And if a white person commit a crime, it's because of something beyond their control. And that influences, like I said, police contact. It influences the arrest rates, the incarceration rates. It influences whether somebody is found guilty of a crime or not. It influences whether somebody is given the death penalty or not. It also influences how children are treated in the educational system. And I'm going to talk about that. Racial-based decision-making by those working in the criminal justice system and the history of oppression and discrimination in the United States. Not only does it control health care and housing, our education, it controls criminal justice. And criminal justice system was one of the first mechanisms of control over minorities in order to keep them in poverty, to keep them from maintaining power. And the criminal justice system is still used as a mechanism of control, from what is a crime to the punishment for crime. Inadequate policies and procedures. The war on drug has been detrimental to minorities. Even when you look at sentencing guidelines, the federal government a couple of years ago got in trouble because of their sentencing guidelines for cocaine. You've got longer sentences for crack cocaine, so smaller amounts of crack cocaine than you did powder cocaine. And generally, what's the difference between who uses powder cocaine and crack cocaine? Race. And so there was a lot of minority individuals in federal prisons because of these disparities in sentencing guidelines, because of the war on drugs. Mandatory minimum sentencing. Do you guys know what that is? So it just means that for individuals who commit certain crimes, there's a mandatory minimum amount of time that they have to serve of their sentence. And many times this is significantly impacted by race. Traffic and pedestrian stops. That is influenced by race. Police officers are more likely to stop minority individuals than white individuals. And when they're stopped, minority individuals, they're more likely to use force. They're more likely to make an arrest and also issue tickets. School policing. We're going to talk about that more. And zero tolerance policies, particularly in the education setting, and we'll talk about that. Systemic disadvantages. Wealth and income influences the criminal justice system. It influences the crime rate. Health access influences crime rates, and also negatively impact those individuals who are caught up in the justice system, whether it's the juvenile justice system or the criminal justice system, once they're punished. education, housing, political disempowerment, environmental injustices. So we talked about, some of the other presenters talked about some of these things, but many times we don't think about how all these things are linked to who commits crimes and why they commit crimes, and how crime is addressed by the criminal justice system. So my main focus on this presentation will be on juvenile justice. And the reason why this says criminal justice, and you think I'm going to talk about adults, but how children are treated have a significant impact on the criminal justice system. If we don't improve the lives of kids, we will never reduce crime. And so we have to look at how children are treated, especially how they're treated in the educational system. Because the educational system can be a gateway to the juvenile justice system and the criminal justice system. And then we're going to talk about police, sentencing, and incarceration. So let's look at juveniles. This is just some statistics. 46 million students enrolled in public K through 12 schools fall 2022. And that's the racial breakdown: 15% Black, 29% Hispanic. But we know that the treatment that juveniles, like I said, experience in America has significant impacts on the criminal justice system, from education, juvenile justice system, and criminal justice system. It's rare that somebody becomes an adult and just starts committing crimes for no reason. When we see crime, it usually starts off by that children being born at a disadvantage, particularly in terms of poverty, disadvantage. And then because they're born at a disadvantage, that means that they have their neighborhoods also have issues taking care of them, their parents. And then they get in the educational system, and there's another system that lets them down. And then as they get older, can't find jobs, or find jobs where there's underemployment. That leads to health problems, mental health problems, that leads to criminality. And so we're going to address all of these. So the educational experience. Disadvantaged youth who are in poverty, youth who are minorities, youth who are abused and neglected, youth with disabilities are at a disadvantage in the educational system. And the way the educational system is done today is going to keep them at a disadvantage. Particularly the funding of our educational system and the testing mechanism of our educational system has taken away a lot of discretion that teachers have in getting kids who are behind and need to catch up. They get left behind. They might act out, and then they're expelled or they're suspended, which keeps them behind and increases their rate of dropping out, which increase their rates of being involved in the criminal justice system, increase their contact with police, and increase their contact with the courts. So disadvantaged youth have gaps in reading, math, writing, and readiness to learn. They have high rates of special education placements. They have high rates of grade repetition. They have high rates of disciplinary actions. And those disciplinary actions we're going to talk about more, but how children are disciplined increase their risk of being involved in the juvenile justice system, dropping out of school, and their educational achievements. And just general, your educational experience impact your outcomes for the rest of your life. So kids who do poorly in school are at risk of delinquent behavior, and school failure is a strong indicator of delinquency. And chronic juvenile delinquents and career criminals tend to have academic failures. So the way disadvantaged children are treated by teachers and school administrators impacts school performance. And the way they're treated is rooted in implicit and explicit biases, school funding, and disciplinary policies and procedures. So implicit and explicit biases, teachers tend to have lower expectations of our minority students. And when they have these lower expectations, they leave these kids behind. They don't help them. They don't focus on them, and kids give up. If the teacher doesn't care about me and my education, why should I care? They might start acting out, and then that's going to increase disciplinary actions against them. Differential applications of policies. When we see disciplinary policies, I think I have a slide on it, but it says that minority students are more likely to be punished for subjective reasons. So for being disrespectful. And the teacher is deciding they're disrespectful. While white students are more likely to be punished for objective reasons such as fighting, bringing drugs to school and things like that. And you can see how if the teacher has a bias against a minority students, they can say whatever they want to in terms of getting that student in trouble by just saying they were disrespectful to me. Minority children are also often excluded from many opportunities for learning, many opportunities for mentorship, many opportunities to participate in programs that will help them learn or help them obtain scholarships, help them participate in activities that will look good for colleges. And of course, just discrimination as well, just discriminated against. School funding, we see that schools that have a predominant or high level of minority students receive the less funding. And the less funding that these individuals have impact the quality of education they experience. But I'm gonna mainly focus on disciplinary policies and procedures though. How many of you guys have heard of the school to prison pipeline? So this is the policies and practices that pushes our nation's school children, especially our most at-risk children, out of the classroom and into the juvenile and criminal justice system. And we're going to see, when we look at educational experiences, we see similarities between the educational experiences in rural areas for minority children that you'll see in urban areas as well. So this is a diagram that I thought you guys might find interesting. So it talks about the school to prison pipeline, but also we'll say at-risk kids are also more likely to be in the system in terms of social system as well, foster care system and things like that. And they also are a breeder ground for prison as well. But in terms of from school to prison, you see that 40% of students expelled from U.S. schools each year are Black. 70% of students involved in in-school arrest, sorry, I have contacts on, referrals to law enforcement are Black or Latino. 3.5 times, Black students are 3.5 times more likely to be suspended than whites. They're 2 times more likely to not graduate. And 68% of the males in state and federal prison do not have a high school diploma. So this shows the link between educational experiences, particularly disciplinary actions and policies of schools with minorities impact our criminal justice system and our juvenile justice system. And these are the students, like I said, that are most impacted by the school to prison pipeline. And many of these first 3 students are also minority students. So you see minority students, by being a minority, It increased their rates of disciplinary actions and involvement in the criminal justice system, juvenile justice system, but also minority students who have learning disabilities are at a special disadvantage, or that are poor, or that are already being maltreated. So these kids are going to school. They're already at a disadvantage. We expect them to sit in school and pay attention, and they don't know when they're going to eat again. They might not have a home. They might not know where they're going to sleep. They might be taking care of their siblings and their parents. They might be living in an area where they're exposed to violence and drugs, and their parents might be engaged in crime. And you expect them to do well and not to act out. So they might be acting out because of all this adversity experience. They're under toxic stress, and them acting out is the educational system should be looking at it. This is a sign that they need help. But no, they look at it as that this is a sign that we need to punish them. And minority students are at great risk. So we talked about this. So Black students 4 times more likely to be suspended, 3 times more likely to be suspended than Latino, 2 times suspension rates without educational services. That means that they get suspended and they go home, they're home, and their education isn't being helped. They have time on their hands, they get in trouble, their parents are working. And generally when you suspend a child, you're supposed to continue their education at home.
Right.
But minority students don't get that, which also impacts that when they go to school, they're behind. And it increases their dropout risk. And again, they're 3.8 times more likely to have out-of-school suspensions compared to whites. Whites are more likely to get in-school suspension where they can continue on with their education, while Black students are out-of-school suspension. This next one, preschool students, 4th grade, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds. 19% of the preschool population are Black, but they make up 47% of out-of-school suspension. What are you suspending 4-year-olds for? And they're 2.3 times school arrest. I mean, what can a 4-year-old do that they need to be out of school suspension? About 15% of K-12 public school students are Black, but they make up 30% of schools suspended, expelled, or arrested. White, I talked about this. White students are suspended for observable behavior. Black students are suspended for subjective actions. And with white students, teachers and administrators, etc., they give them an excuse for their acting out as a reason not to discipline them, not to suspend them, expel them, or contact the justice system or the police. But with Black students, they believe that if they're acting out, it's because they're violent and we need to punish them. Black students with learning disabilities are 3 times more likely to be suspended than white students with learning disabilities, and 4 times more likely to end up in correctional facilities. This is a map that I got also in terms of 13 southern states where you have rural populations as well. 55% of all Black suspension from U.S. public schools occurs in 13 southern states. Look at Mississippi. Look at Tennessee. Look at Texas.
States considered the Black Belt.
The Bible Belt. In 84 school districts across the South, 100% of students suspended were Black. And look at that, the blue is Blacks as percentage of students enrolled, and then the orange is a Black percentage of students suspended.
Wait a minute, say that again.
The blue is black students that are enrolled, and the orange is suspension percentages. So Tennessee, 23% of the students K through 12 are black, but they make up 58% of the suspensions.
Well, but then, that 100% of the students suspended in 84 school
It's
districts.
84 school districts.
Another problem with the educational experience in juveniles is having school resource officers in the school. Yes, that can be useful, but what has been found is that schools are now using them to discipline students and address problems that the schools should be doing, and they have done in the past. So if they have a school resource officer, they're more likely to have that officer address their problems instead of the administrator. Where the administrator would have used some type of in-school suspension, talking to parents, and stuff like that. The police officer in the school is more likely to take them into custody or refer them to the juvenile justice system. So there's high minority students equals large school security measures and budgets. So if that school system has a high population of minority students, they have higher school resource officers in the school, and their budgets tend to be higher for school security measures, such as stuff like having police dogs, metal detectors, resource officers in the school, guards, and things like that. And school resource officers have been proven to be more aggressive towards black students. And black students are 11 times more likely to have school resource officers in their school compared to white students. Oh my gosh, I have my 40 class. Okay. School resource officers. Well, suspension is the biggest predictor of dropping out of school, unemployment, receiving social welfare programs, delinquency, court involvement, and imprisonment. Rural education experience. 1 in 5 students attending public education in a rural area, and these rural children experience the same or similar rates of biases and harsh disciplinary practices as your urban schools. Here's some police. 8 out of 10 black adults agree that blacks are treated unfairly by the police. Blacks 5 times more likely to say unfair stop by the police, and half as likely to positively view the police treatment of minorities. I'll just let you guys look at some of the graphs. This is black resident experience police misconduct at 12 times the rate of white residents. Police are more likely to search blacks and Latino drivers than whites, but police are often less likely to find drugs or weapons among black and Latinos compared to whites. 6% of blacks and Hispanic Americans pulled over for a traffic stop were searched or arrested. White Americans were less likely to be ticketed. Police are more likely to search black and Latinos. Here's some. Police disproportionately threaten the use of force against communities of color. Victim killed by police by race compared to the U.S. population. What do you see now? Blacks have higher rates compared to their population, 12, 13%, and twice as likely to be killed by the police. Police discrimination in rural communities. More black officers and white officers in rural departments indicate that bias-based policing is an issue and suggests that white officers tend to underestimate the level of police bias. Arrest rates are higher in rural areas compared to urban areas among American Indians and black population. And some events as fatal shooting by police are similar to urban areas. And minorities are more likely to have injurious shootings in rural areas compared to urban areas. Okay, I'm gonna have to stop there. I can spend a whole semester talking about this.
We'll probably get to talk about the rest of it.
Okay. Yes. Dr. Giles will be moderating.
So again, thanks to Dr. Lee for sharing all of this great information with us. Some of it may have been surprising, but a lot of this information was just reconfirmed by some of the experiences and beliefs that we had. One thing I do want to ask you, like with the title Red and Police, can you explain what red?
Racial and ethnic disparities.
Thank you. Okay.
It used to be
because
called disproportionate minority contact.
Okay, so red is so much easier.
Yes.
Okay, great.
I should have put it in red too.
Right.
Yeah.
Next time.
Police. So this forum today is looking at rural areas, some of the issues that rural residents in West Tennessee experience. And as you could tell from Dr. Lee's presentation, arrest rates are higher in rural areas among Black Americans, American Indian, and other populations of color. So what are some issues that maybe you all have seen? I'm assuming most of us are from rural areas in West Tennessee. When you think in terms of excessive force or arrests, and we'll get into the educational system a little bit later, what are some issues that some of you have seen in rural communities as it relates to the criminal justice system, or the criminal injustice system as I refer to it sometimes?
I would say the mental health factor in arrest situations. We had an experience, I guess a gentleman had, he was having a mental episode, and instead of the officers taking him to the hospital, they took him to the jail setting and became disruptive. Long story short, he ended up dying, and for they sued for about $2 million.
Now, where was this?
It's up in Union City.
Union City.
So, I mean, that's one of the factors. One other thing I saw on the chart, they talked about the SROs. I hadn't thought about that factor. But now, with the legislation and all of the school shootings and such, they're pushing more SROs into the schools. But I think what's going to happen is, as the statistic said, the minority group is going to probably be displaced more so into the other systems now. I hadn't thought about that. That's something you would be thinking about. That mental health factor is, I think, the big key.
Yeah, research shows that mental health is one of the deciding factors with use of force by policing, as well as race is another one.
I don't want to harp on the mental health factor, but the mental health factor is a big thing. We sit and look at the papers and wonder what is going on in the streets. We got young people out in the street that are breaking down mentally and emotionally from all of the things that cause this disparity, you know. So if we don't start addressing that, the headlines, you won't want to see them. And just my father is from Lexington, Mississippi.
Did you guys talk about this?
Huh?
Did you guys talk about this before?
Oh, I've heard about it, and I'm glad to see what happened. But I do volunteer work in the jail in Memphis, and once they get there, they've already been damaged or destroyed. So if we don't start trying to do something to check before they get out of school or get to school, we're gonna have, my judgment is, this is just gonna overwhelm us. And I don't want to speak in a defeated term, and if we don't do something, it's gonna overrun us.
Unfortunately, a big problem in rural areas is that they don't have the resources to help individuals, and the criminal justice system is where they receive treatment. Or the judges feel like they have no choice but to send them through the courts until jails and prisons because there's nothing in the community to help them. And you see that's impacted minorities more because with white individuals, typical middle income and upper income areas, there's communities can take care of them. So that if they're more likely to get plea bargains, no sentence or warning, because there's other institutions in the community that can address mental health, that can address drug and alcohol use, anger management, and things like that. So your rural populations have high rates of incarceration, and that's significantly impacting minorities and minority communities in rural areas. And we have to do something about that.
I'm another one that works in the jail ministry in Crockett County. And I've noticed the number of minorities there, and I would estimate that the number of minorities in the jail is equivalent to the population within Crockett County. So I don't see any disparities there. I'm not denying there is in other places. But one prisoner in the jail that I talked to that came from a very difficult situation. And I asked him, I said, what was the cause of your situation being in jail? He said, well, drugs, alcohol, and men coming and going all the time. That was what he did. And I asked him, I said, how many other kids in Crockett County School come from a similar situation that you came from? He estimated about 30%, 20 to 30%. I talked to the superintendent of the school, and he said it's more like 40%. Now, this is one of the great tragedies of our current age. 40% of our children come from a drug-infested, dysfunctional home. So the answer to our problem really is not racial disparity so much, that exists, I admit, but it's the moral and spiritual depravity of our country. And what are we going to do about that?
I don't know if it's moral or spiritual disparities. I think we're seeing that drugs and alcohol is linked to racial disparities and adversity more than morals and spirituals. How many of those people are in poverty? How many of those people are unemployed? How many of them have poor family experiences or grew up in communities that can provide for them or that had other adversities? And drug and alcohol is a way to cope.
Right. Several things. Great conversation. With all due respect, the drug and alcohol problem and the dysfunctional families
are grounded and rooted in the enslavement. It is part of the genetic makeup of a people that were enslaved for over 400 years. 4 million were released with nowhere to go, no skill set. And so over generations, that helps to bring us where we are. That may not be the only cause, but I would offer you, sir, that it's probably 75% at least. The other thing is, as a people, Black folks, we don't want to talk about mental health. That's not something we talk about. It's like everything else. It's uncomfortable. We're embarrassed by it. We don't want to talk about mental health. And we certainly don't want to suggest that somebody get some treatment. We're more apt to say, pray about it. Now, I pray all the time, but you got to have some action behind that prayer. And if you don't, it won't work. And so, again, I'm not saying that what that young man said to you was totally wrong. I'm just telling you from my lived experience, it's a much deeper issue than that. It really is. It is a much deeper issue than, you have to think about why. What was the why? Why is it drug infested? Why is there criminality? Because there's a reason. Now, we will never get rid of drugs and crime. But there appears to be an overabundance of those things that impact my community and my people. That's why that's why we're trying to do these things. So we can help people better understand that there's a lot more to understanding the challenges that we all have than just drugs and alcohol and crime.
And I would say that the criminal justice system will never address the crime problem or reduce recidivism. Harsh punishment doesn't reduce recidivism. What has been proven to reduce recidivism and reduce crime rates, like I said, programs K through 4.
We don't have.
In the community.
And in addition to what has been said, of course there are some moral issues in our world, but I think we should avoid using that as a scapegoat. So in your county of Crockett, you know, have you driven around Bells or what is it, Alamo, that area? Drive around and see who's living where and how these people are living and what resources are in their communities. Are there more liquor stores or check cashing places where people live as opposed to resources that can help them with education, with employment? So it's not so easy to say that there is a moral defect. Obviously there is, but we can't lay the blame on that, and we can't lay the blame on the people. That's why I try to avoid categorizing people as underprivileged or whatever. They are underserved. They don't have the resources in their communities. So it's not their fault, but there are so many other things at play. And I think we have to be honest and look at those issues. See where people live. You know, talk to more people than folks who are already incarcerated. I mean, of course, you can get good information from them, but talk to other people in the community as well. I think.
I just want to say this. Things are going to happen to our children in the communities. Things are going to happen in the school system as they grow up. I was a single parent, 2 African-American sons, okay? They were picked on. Right on here, J.B. Young in Venus, they were picked on. One of the tools I used once I heard about it, you've got to communicate. Teach our children to communicate to us, their grandparents. Tell somebody. Once you tell a responsible person, then we take charge in a responsible, matured way. Go to the Board of Education, because remember, we're protecting our children, but we're also teaching our children. So, you know, once you become an adult, if this happens to your child, my grandbabies, this is what you need to do. And you think about it. Please, as I told my sons, communication is a key. And also, my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, came up out of Mississippi in the mid-1940s and moved my grandmother and my father, my dad, all of them up here. This is as far as he could get, Jackson, Tennessee. Home of Lane College, Lambeth College, Union University. He had intended to go further, but you know, they had babies, twins and all of that. He stopped here. Told my grandmother, okay. She said, now why are you stopping here? We're still in the South. He said, well, our children have got to be educated. So here, we heard about Lane College. We heard about the other colleges. She said, but why? He said, we've got to be responsible adults and teach our children so that they'll teach our grandkids how to love not just African Americans, but all people in order to make the home good, the community, and society. So, and I preach this to my sons today. They're in their 40s. And one of them has kids. He's got a family. Please communicate, be respectable. When things happen to you, things happened when William was a teenager. He was being pulled over by the police. Be a responsible male. Don't try to buck and run and fight them. Just be responsible. And the sheriffs out that way says, they looked at his driver's license and said, who's your mother? And he said, okay, who's your grandparents? William told him. Because my parents were known in the community to be decent, hardworking, they left my babies alone. And I tell my parents all, black and white, carry yourself like something. And encourage your children to carry themselves like something. Because you're not just living for yourself, you're living for your children too.
Related to mental health.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to speak and share as a licensed mental health professional. A lot of the mental health conditions that we see are affecting individuals is related to trauma. And what we've heard a great deal about from Dr. Lee, these examples, and then other topics shared earlier today, we have to consider historical trauma. We have to consider people's experiences that they're having with law enforcement and in other environments, education settings that are oftentimes re-traumatizing. And how that trauma is carried even generationally. And so mental health is, I would concur with everyone who's spoken that is a great concern. There is an initiative here in Jackson. It hasn't begun just yet, but it's in the works. And if anyone is familiar with Recovery Court is an effort to try and respond to charges that are related to a substance, to try and put some things that could mediate and into effect before a person, say, serves time or other things. What can we do to prevent? Well, the same thing hopefully will occur soon, and it will be mental health court. And so hopefully we're taking some different steps to try and address those issues for people. So thank you. And one more note related to what was said earlier about drugs and crime. Yes, these are problems, but again, they may be the way that someone is trying to cope with their trauma.
All right, we will do that one more presenter. Matt.
So I'll be really quick. Oh, this is loud. I think it's important that we go back to this idea of moral responsibility and those things. I think that's true on pastors. Of course, I think moral responsibility is important. But that being said, what we discovered, and there's been a number of Department of Justice, a lot of Department of Justice research on this, when you adjust for wealth distribution, all of a sudden, those disparities in crime rates disappear. In other words, in poor white neighborhoods, their crime rates match poor black neighborhoods. So then it no longer, so the moral issue, sure, is there, but it's not in any way tied to anything racial. It's tied to people trying to survive. And often when people are put in tough situations, they make decisions that they otherwise wouldn't make. And so then the onus becomes, instead of us placing it on those households, on those people, the onus becomes on us to do something to make our society and community more equitable. That we are not forcing them into situations to make difficult decisions. But that's a whole other conversation about love that our country typically doesn't have.
I think you can cover the adverse childhood experiences, right? Yeah, I suggest that you have this, that you study that, because kids who are under toxic stress, and one of the toxic stresses is experiencing racism, being in the foster care, experiencing abuse and neglect and other things, these kids have high rates of cancers, high rates of mental health, high rates of job quality and early death and involvement in the criminal justice system. So yes, it's great to talk to your kids and have a positive communication relationship with your kids, but it's also on us to actually understand all this stuff that's going on, so that that kid who's under stress or all these negative consequences might not talk to you about it, but our educators need to understand this. Our communities need to understand this. Parents need to understand that, so that that child doesn't have to communicate that with you. If a child is sleeping in class or talking back, instead of saying what is wrong with you and I need to punish you, try to figure out what's going on in that child's life. That might explain that. And many times it's not morals, it's not that a bad kid or something like that. Something significant is going on with that child, and that's what we need to focus on more. What is going on in your life that's causing this behavior?
Thank you
Sorry.
all. Thanks, Dr. Lee, again for this presentation. I think one of the takeaways for me was toxic stress. And again, communication is good. Sometimes, our students, we've seen cases of where students have been tossed out of school because of their hair, because it doesn't conform to a particular thing. So let's just focus on being aware and seeing what we can do to help people instead of pointing a finger